Namaste and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology Debunking Mythology. Sattology means science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means science or study of fake, lie, or imagination. You know, every human being on the planet needs entertainment because that's what motivates them or refreshes their mind and get back to work next time or next day whenever they could. I have one guest today, special guest, who has revolutionized entertainment. And I'm going to talk about the future of entertainment. And with the AI and OTT platforms and Netflix and all these platforms are there. So let's get back right into the conversation. Welcome, Larry Namer.
Hi, nice to be here.
Thank you, thank you. I when I met you first time with Richard through Richard Gordon at the literature festival, I was just amazed by your simplicity, just blown away. And this is the man who has accomplished a lot, and he is so approachable and so simple. What's the secret?
Well, I grew up, my family originally from Turkey. And, when they came here to the U.S., their aspiration was for their children to, have security, job security, and eventually get a civil service job so you could retire at 65 and all of that. But they really did invoke in me and my brother and my sister this feeling of we're part of something bigger, and don't ever forget that what's going on in the world is typically more important than what we're doing. And so we've all kind of created that feeling of humility and stuff like that, and that's kind of how we live our life.
It shows off because it does speak a lot about the upbringing and the culture in the family. A lot. Uh, my when I see a profile and the viewers should search out his name, Larry Namer, on Google, and I don't have to say much. Uh, when you see the standards of entertainment, even today, when I want to watch a movie, I would love to watch a movie from 70s and 80s and maybe early 90s. And now when I see the movies are mostly sometimes I don't understand them. There some really good movies have come out like Avatar and many good movies are there. So how do you see the transition from old to new today?
Well, I think number one, first and foremost, is this great change in the way movies and entertainment in general are distributed. I mean, it used to be where going to a movie theater was kind of the primary way of getting the best of entertainment, and stuff that was on TV was typically older or whatever. But now I think the one good thing that kind of came out of COVID was it really forced people to pay attention to what's happening in new technology. I mean, the rise of platforms like Netflix and Paramount Plus and Disney Plus and Max and all of those, and realizing that there's amazingly good quality on those things there. So I think what you're seeing is the movie theaters. I think the days of the 16-plex movie theaters is not very long. They got to think of another use, but you'll see the big blockbusters in movie theaters. But then you'll see amazingly creative independent work that goes on either the cable platforms or the streaming platforms and stuff. And for a creator, the form is much more. Um, it's much more conducive to creating really deep and rich stories. And because I mean, a good example, I'm doing a project called Empress. It's about the first and only woman to rule China. And when we wrote it as a theatrical, and we had Ron Bass write it, and Ron won the Academy Award for Rain Man and Joy Luck Club, and great writer, but we could never get it really down to where we could feel for the characters and get to understand the characters because she was taken into the palace when she was 14 and ended up rising to become the empress and leaving the palace in 72. And there's just so much that happens in between that you really can't cover it in a 2 hour movie. But yet, when you do it more in a Game of Thrones like fashion, where it's this serialized, you know, group of 1 hour programs, you really get to explore the characters. So creatively, what this transition to streaming services and online and in-home entertainment has really been a boon. It's really been a lifesaver.
Indeed, indeed, because the way the information consumption is changing, people are more used to their cell phones. The watch reels have more, I think, reach than most of the other forms of video. Uh, Tell me about your journey. Like for some of the viewers are very young. Tell me a little bit about your journey. That how you chose entertainment industry in general.
Well, I think the entertainment industry chose me. I'm not sure I chose it. Um, but I was immigrant kid, and the aspiration from my parents was to get the civil service job and stuff. But I was the first kid to go to college in the family, and I graduated with a degree in economics and minor in history. And I very quickly learned that there weren't a lot of jobs out there for economists. So I got what I thought was going to be a temporary job, working in the in the electrician world, where they had just organized this thing called cable television, and nobody was quite sure what it was back then. But I got a job as an assistant underground splicer in Manhattan, which meant I would go under the streets of New York every day and put the wires together. And they paid me $90 a week and stuff. But I quickly learned how to use all the equipment and all the techniques and stuff. So I kind of rose through the ranks, the technical ranks there. So I was an assistant splicer, then I was a splicer. Um, and then I became a construction guy and a service guy and installer, and then I moved into management. And I think I was 25. I was the director of operations at Manhattan Cable. I had like 300 and some odd people working for me, and but then what had happened was all the big cities began to realize that cable TV was a way to get more than just good reception. And they wanted cable in all the cities, but they didn't want the cable to go on telephone poles as it typically was doing around the United States. They wanted it to go underground. So the city of Los Angeles granted a franchise to a Toronto company to build a cable company in LA. At that time, it was going to be the biggest two-way cable system in the United States, and but they insisted that all the wires go underground and not on telephone poles. Well, the only person around that knew how to build underground cable systems was me. So I got recruited to come out to LA and build this Valley Cable. And so then I kind of got exposed to programming and finance and all of those things. But when you're a Brooklyn kid and you come out to California and all your friends and neighbors are going to all these Hollywood parties and premieres and stuff. So I would call the studios and say, "Hey, could you put me on the list?" And their first reaction was, "No, you're more like the phone company or the gas company. You're a utility. You're not in the media business." And finally, I just said to them, I said, "Look, the most effective marketing vehicle you have for a movie is um, is a movie trailer. It's the best 2 minutes of a movie typically." I said, "But yet the only time I ever see the movie trailer is when I'm already in the movies." I said, "It seems a little backwards to me. Wouldn't it be better if people could see the movie trailer when they're in their house and make them want to go to the movies?" And they said, "Yeah, but it's very expensive. We really can't afford that." Now, I was building the first 61 channel cable system in the country, and I didn't have 61 channels to put on. So I said, "Hey, give me those movie trailers. I'll put them on TV for you, but you put me on the list for all those parties and the premieres." And they said, "Sure, if you'll do that." And they did it. And but when we started doing audience research, you said, "What's your favorite channel?" And they go, "Well, we love CNN, we love ESPN, we love that trailer channel." And I was going like, "Wait a second, I'm getting the best 2 minutes of a $50 million movie for free, and people love it." So the company I work for sold out, and they went back to Canada, and I was not going from New York to LA to go to Canada. So me and my friend Alan Marufka, we just kicked around ideas, and he was saying, "I always wanted to do something like MTV of the movies." And I said, wait a second. I said, I get all these movie trailers. It's no different than a music video. And they stand a host in front of a green screen and they point to the green screen and go, and Madonna has a new video. I said, we could stand a host in front of a green screen and say, and Schwarzenegger has a new movie. Um, so, we thought we were brilliant. We wrote a business plan. But unfortunately, everybody was telling us you're not Rupert Murdoch, you're not Time Incorporated, or Fox, or and people don't start TV networks. Nobody's ever done it before, and nobody will ever do it. But we were not smart enough to listen, so we just kept going, and then actually 3.5 years later, when we were almost ready to give up, we met a guy that was just took over investment banking for his company on Wall Street, and we pitched him, and he loved it. And at that time, the going rate to start a TV network was somewhere between 60 and $100 million. And Al and I realized nobody's giving us 60 or $100 million. And this guy said, "Hey, I love it. I want to do the deal." And we said, "Great. Could you give us more like the 100 million?" And he said, "Well, I'm only allowed to sign for 2.5." And we were like, "What are we supposed to do with 2.5? I mean, the minimum is 60." And he goes, "Well, that's all I'm allowed to sign for." And we just said, "You know what? We're smart enough. We'll figure it out." So we took the $2.5 million. And I had a friend who was teaching radio, television, film at University of Texas in Austin. And I called him up and said, "Hey, Brian, do you got kids that need intern jobs?" And he literally sent 31 kids to LA. And what people don't realize, he did not start from any big company. We started with 11 employees and 31 interns.
Amazing, amazing story. You did mention about your project in China with the Empress, and also the you have some other business interests there. So how do you see the Chinese movie culture? So my experience of China was a Brian Adams song, Summer of '69, a Chinese guy singing it. That was the funniest thing I experienced in Shanghai.
Yeah. We excuse me, we find the Chinese market fun. We do TV, film, internet content. We do a lot of immersive entertainment there. We do a lot of children's live events. We just licensed Shrek the musical and Peppa Pig and things like that. We actually have had nothing but a good experience in China, and it's because we don't try and change Chinese culture. We program only in Mandarin language. We program to the Chinese market. Um, and we're very respectful. We're not there to change their political system or their views or anything like that. We're there to entertain, and the Chinese have been very good to us. With that, we don't step over the line, and they don't really censor us or bother us or stuff like that. So we find the audiences there are probably what audiences were in the U.S. in maybe the 50s, was much more family oriented. Multi generational families existed, which I don't think really exists now. And just Asian culture in general is much more respectful of their elders than the U.S. or the Western markets. And for me, now that I've kind of moved out of my teenage years, it's much more interesting and stuff to be somewhere where they respect the wisdom that comes along with age, and we program that into everything we do because that's part of their culture, and I think the reason we've been successful there, while most Western companies have failed, is because we've just accepted the fact that we're there to entertain them. We're not there to change them or change their government or anything like that. So we do quite well in China.
So you mentioned something very important, and you mentioned about your family, that how the family taught you, drilled into you humility and respecting the elders, which is everybody wants it, but we don't know how to do it. So how do you see those values coming back into this country?
Well, it's really really difficult and stuff because we in China, they have early retirement, so people, families, mother and father go to work, and typically you have two sets of grandparents taken care of, and they have the one child policy. So you have the mother and father, and then you have two sets of grandparents. So you have six people taking care of one kid, and the kid grows up in that multi-generational family, so they develop this respect for it. Here in the US particularly, kids go away to school, and they're typically not raised with their grandparents, and sometimes hardly know their grandparents and stuff. But we have to do something, and we're actually working on uh, a project now. Now that with COVID, I started doing a lot of stuff in the U.S., and all of it has to have a let's call it a social impact component to it. Besides making money, it has to do good. So we created a series which we're actually out taking it out now to the streamers in particular, called Conscious Parenting, which really is a recognition of how difficult it's become to be a parent in today's world, and with the goal to try and create a generation of better parents, because we can create a generation of better kids. So we have to harness all the tools we have, whether it be traditional media, social media, but there has to be an end goal, which is to make this a better place before we leave it. And that's in how we deal with people, how we deal with animals, how we deal with the environment. I think that's our mission, is to leave it better than we found it.
No, that's what both of us are trying to do. We are doing in terms of education, and you're doing in terms of information. I mean, in a much more better way than us. We are into mostly into getting new ideas. No, one thing very interesting you said, conscious parenting, because it's really all boils down to that. But if you see the movies which I see sometimes, and somewhere they always show a hero have going to his ex-wife's home and meeting his own kid. Very, it's like it gives a message out. What do you say? What do you see?
Yeah, no, it's media is very powerful, and people seem to take what they see on the screen as being the way real life is, or the way real life should be, and it's not necessarily the case. I mean, with conscious parenting, there was a woman named Catherine Sellery. Catherine, while she's a Caucasian woman, lived in Hong Kong for 25 years, and would go all around the world doing TED Talks and talk about parenting and things like that. And but it's very, very different. And at first, when she pitched me the idea, I was like, wasn't sure that there was enough entertainment value in it or enough need for it. But when I started to dig in, I thought about it. I said, when I was born, my mother took me home from the hospital. My grandmother lived upstairs. My aunt lived next door. My mother had the proverbial village to help her. Now, like I say, these kids grow up. They typically don't even know their grandparents. They don't have that kind of family support system built around them. But also, we're now in an age where we have bullying, we have school shootings, social media, gender identification issues. It's really, really hard to be a parent in today's world. And I think we got to harness media, because media has the ability to get a message across forcefully and broadly across languages and cultures. We have to start building better parents, or we're going to end up with a generation of really miserable kids.
I wrote one book, The Eternal Love, to bring back. I'll give it to you as whenever I meet you next time. Uh, so I brought an ancient story into today's context for Americans to see what are the responsibilities of a wife, and from a story point of view.
Yep.
You mentioned about a lot of issues there, genderism and all these things going on, which is confusing many people. So what do you think is the, when you saw the Chinese culture and the American culture, what's the differences you immediately saw actually?
Well, I mean, I'll give you a good example. I mean, here in the U.S., I'm probably better known as the founder of E Entertainment Television. Um, And but if we were to do a story for, let's say, E News, and let's say we were going to interview Tom Cruise, so the way the pendulum is swung here is everything has kind of gone towards the negative. So with Tom Cruise, it'd be like, so tell us about this religion that you're part of, this Scientology, and things like that. And in the West, everybody's looking for the negative. side of the story. Let's catch somebody cheating on his wife, and we'll ruin his life forever. And that's that. But in China, it's much sweeter and gentler, and I hope it stays that way. So if we were to tell my Chinese crew, we do a news show in China, entertainment news. If we were to say we're going to interview Tom Cruise next week, what do we want to ask him? They don't want to know about his religion or anything. They want to go, could you ask him what he does with his children on the weekend? And so that's where, and again, I love it because I know too many people in Hollywood, and I'm not about to go and start doing this scandalous kind of programming and stuff. And so China's refreshing because it's sweeter and gentler and more innocent than things are here.
You said right. Actually, people jump to what's your religion and what's your things instead of focusing on the core human issues, which are very common across every community. And
Yeah.
yes, you're saying something.
Yeah, no, we my feeling is that no matter where we go, and I've had the number one comedy in China that I wrote, which people say is amazing that somebody could write comedy for a language they don't necessarily speak and a culture they didn't grow up in. I had the number one TV show in Russia for 10 years, um, and it's this belief that 85% of us is common. It's common humanity. There's only 15% that's really influenced by where we grew up and how we grew up and the culture we grew up in. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all human beings and we have the same core values. We want a roof over our head. We want to raise our children properly. We want to educate our kids, and things like that. So there's great commonality among people from all over the world. We have much more in common than we do in terms of differences.
You see, I was at a festival yesterday. Some event was organized, and I was called to speak on my book. And I saw people making lots of videos using cell phones, and what they were showing on the screen was totally different. Was the AI was merged into that, and it had a deep. It was making a story out of something which was not there. So, how do you see this impact of new technologies like AI coming into the entertainment industry?
Well, I think AI in general, I mean, entertainment and other, um, is like amazingly transformational technology. But with that said, there's as much of a chance of it doing bad as it does have of doing good. I think again, I'll talk to the way things are in the West because China and Asia are a little bit different. I think our politicians don't understand it, and what I see is here a lot of people think if they put their head in the sand, it's going to go away. Well, it's not going to go away. If you look at the music business, they spent 10 years trying to say digital music, they're not going to let digital music exist. And of course, it's going to exist. And now they're complaining that, iTunes and Spotify have kind of, become the big bullies on the block. And if you go back and you look at technology, cavemen used to paint on the side of a cave with cow blood and stuff, and they weren't real happy when somebody invented canvas and oil paint and stuff. But we see a lot more paintings on canvas with oil paint than we see on the side of caves. Um, More recently, people owned horse farms and ranches, and they thought everybody would drive a horse and buggy, and they weren't happy when somebody invented the car. But if you look out the window, there are a lot more cars out there than horse and buggies. Technology, when it has the ability to do good, will prevail. But our politicians really haven't developed any basis of regulating it that stops people from doing bad things with it. And we need that. We need some deterrence to for people to know that there are consequences for doing bad. And again, that's entertainment and everything else. And I think the good example, and I use this a lot, a 12-year-old kid can't say, "Hey, I feel like driving, pick up the keys and go and drive a car." Because there's you got to be a certain age, depending on the state you live in. You got to take a driving education course. You got to take a driving test, and then there are rules of the road. And if you don't obey the rules of the road, you lose your right to drive. Well, with AI, there's no deterrence for doing anything bad. It's the Wild West. You could do anything you want because there's nothing that says you can't do that or you shouldn't do that. So I think first and foremost, our the technology is going to move forward, and it's moving forward in an incredibly credible state. Is to kind of create the rules of the road for AI and what you can do and what you can't do, and then enforcement mechanisms for those.
Absolutely right. I mean, some kind of checks need to be there. Earlier, you mentioned that media is a very powerful medium and it influences a lot of people. And I'm sure such a positive outlook you have on everything. Clarity of thought is there, and I know this comes from years of struggle. It's not just one day. Uh, Today most of the society is into everything rapid on the fingertips. Don't want People don't want to work hard for something. I mean, the society has been everything has been easily available. So I really like the term conscious parenting that you used before for the show that you want to do. What is the thing which you think you can use in the modern technology for bringing back old values?
Sure. We a good example. I'm doing a show now that will go on in 2025, which is called Natasha After Dark. And Natasha is a single gal. She 8 years ago was homeless on the streets of London, just single mom, and she's now in the U.S. and she's life coaching. She's inspirational, motivational speaker, does TED Talks and does conferences all over the world. So if you look at late night television in the United States, it's mainly dominated by men. And they're all the same. It's a guy sitting behind a desk and he interviews a celebrity and says, "So tell me about your next movie or TV show or music album or whatever." Natasha's show is very different. She life coaches people like Steve Aoki and Will I Am and there. So her show is going to be like an 11 o'clock show, and it's more about inspiration and motivational. It's how to be a better human being and stuff. And I think while it doesn't solve all the problems with our society, it's a step in the right direction. We need more of that. People, particularly after COVID, are not looking for the train wrecks anymore. They want something to feel good about, that tomorrow is going to be a better day than today, and the outlook for the future is bright. So we're trying to achieve that with the Natasha After Dark, and that'll go on, sometime February and March, and hopefully it'll help people kind of understand that life is all about a balance, and it's not this or that. We're all in search of the same things ultimately, and hopefully it helps move the needle in that direction.
Now, Hollywood has a big impact on the whole world everywhere, and Hollywood has a huge impact. And I think the Hollywood also creates human behaviors, whether it's in Africa or India or China or US. I mean, how do you see the future of Hollywood? Because many of the Hollywood actors are taking political sides nowadays. You're politically neutral, which I see that. You're on the side of values. So how do you see that happening? Because people are taking them as role models.
Yeah. Well, first, I think you get to just the term of Hollywood. It used to be, and I've always thought this, that um, Hollywood was always thought as a geographical place where you come to make movies or television. And, back in the day where, cameras were a few $100,000 for a camera, that was absolutely true. Everybody had to come here. But as technology has made the barriers to entry less and less, um, you could make movies anywhere in the world. I mean, one of the things that totally bugs me is, our Academy Awards. We have one category called Best Foreign Film, and I'm like, what is a foreign film? I could take my iPhone and go to Nigeria this afternoon and make a movie on my iPhone. So I think Hollywood is kind of misnamed or misinterpreted. It's a level of creativity, it's a level of technical quality, but it's no longer the geographical center of where you need to come to make movies. There are great things coming out of India now, and Turkey, and Israel, and China. There's just amazing stuff going on because technology is brought down those barriers to entry, and it's allowing creative people from all over to do it. And I think ultimately it's a great thing because it's going to help us around the world learn a little bit about each other, where certain things were always being seen from the eyes of a Westerner and physically located in Hollywood. You don't have that anymore. You have great storytellers from all around the world. You just look at what's happened in the last, 10 years with stuff coming out of Korea. Um, it's amazingly good quality. It's as good as anything I see ever coming out of Hollywood. So I think that really is a very positive change that we're seeing people who have good stories to tell, no matter where they live, now have the ability to tell those stories and reach global audiences.
I can see that happening with Netflix and other platforms.
Yep.
People are going to like 192 countries with their stories, and oftentimes we see different cultural aspects also. So, in your viewpoint, in looking at the whole world, how do you see the and generally the when you see these movies from foreign countries, you know that the humanity is the same. Human values are the same. Everyone is seeking truth, everyone is seeking happiness for their families, themselves, and they all want to do something good for others. That is also I see. Everyone wants to do something good to others. Now, but when it comes to reach, Hollywood has a maximum reach all over the world, irrespective of which continent you are in. How did that happen?
Well, I think you kind of go back to like the early 1900s, and you look at the immigration that came out of Eastern Europe, um, and we just had this influx into the United States, and particularly Hollywood, of just great storytellers, and a lot of it goes back to the whole thing of Jewish culture and stuff where storytelling and passing along stories from generation to generation was very much ingrained in the civilization and stuff. So those people came to Hollywood and started the movie studios, and for many generations, it's always been the best storytellers come out of Hollywood. Now you don't have that. I mean, like I say, there's great storytellers coming out of everywhere. I mean, I speak at some of the greatest media schools or radio, television, and film schools like USC, and you go in there, and I got to say, when I speak in front of a class at USC these days, half of the kids in that class are coming from India or China. And then they go back to where they're from. So they're taking that. So it takes a generation for all that skill set to transfer and develop. But we're seeing, fabulous storytelling happen from all over the world now, and it will continue to be that way.
True. I think it's going to continue that way because the stories people are trying to connect to their own cultures. Now, this also brings back to one thing that everybody today is looking back into their history, and thanks to social media. And I really love social media in that aspect, bringing out the truth and also letting people express themselves. The freedom of expression is there. What do you see?
Yeah, well, I think again, we have all the positives that come from social media, and people are getting a wider exposure to people of all different cultures, and that's absolutely positive. But I think again, one of the dangers, and we bring back AI, is AI's ability to create things that are not necessarily true, but yet when presented appear to be true. And how do we create some filtering system for people where you look at it and say, you know what, uh, that's probably an AI generated story and not necessarily the truth. So how do we protect the truth and stuff while we're now in this era where people can invent their own version of the truth and stuff. And again, it goes to, how do we police AI and how do we create technologies that help us produce it. I mean, I could watch a video on Facebook now, and it could look like Joe Biden is, murdering children on the street, and it would look perfect and stuff. How could I, as a consumer, know that that was generated by something other than the truth?
True. I think the platforms like the information integrators like ChatGPT and other people can be easily programmed with lies because this if they source the data from Wikipedia and it's a major source which has been now pointed out that it's falsifying many histories,
Yeah.
and it's a very common thing, common occurrence. There are some social media platforms who do write that AI generated. They do highlight. X, I think, does that. But you're right. There has to be somebody to do that. But at the same time, I mean, what can we say about the bodies themselves who regulate that?
Well, I mean, I'm amazed that, particularly in the U.S., we're trying to get rid of TikTok. Um, of course, it's a Chinese company, and I don't necessarily see the danger in TikTok being any greater than the danger of X being in the hands of Elon Musk. I mean, not that he's not entitled to his political views, but, how do we say that if a person's Chinese, they can't own a social media platform, but if a person lives in, Nevada or wherever Elon lives, those are okay? Um, those are things that we got to solve because, again, technology is just going to keep marching on, and we have to find a way so that we deter bad people from doing bad things, and um, and we really do need to accept that we've become one world. In many ways, particularly with digital media. And I mean, I'll give you a funny statistic. In China, there are more people that base um, their clothing choices or stuff on from watching a TV show called Gossip Girl. Then there are more people who watch that show in China than there are members of the Communist Party in China. So the power of media and technology is just so far bigger than just about anything else out there, and we have to create the rules that people need to at least know that there are rules and there are consequences, and we just don't have that.
India banned TikTok, uh, obviously for political reasons, and also most of the social media platforms are used by the governments and to create a social change or government change. It is been used for warfare, information warfare. And India banned TikTok, but Instagram is doing as bad the job as TikTok in
Yeah.
India. And so you're right, absolutely. Because how can we decide one platform is better than others when they're controlled from outside?
Yep.
You know? So now coming back to one question about your forays into the uh, truthful side, how to extract truth out of something, and because truth is relative, can be truth for you, cannot be truth for somebody else. It's all about interpretation. So how do you see the narratives being defended or created to force a view on somebody?
Well, I myself, I'm a voracious reader. And before digital, I used to read magazines. I used to read probably 50 magazines a month and read probably three or four books. Now, I still read the same number of magazines, but I read them on my iPad. Um, I think it's just we need to instill in people the fact that they you need to seek out truth. You need to people are not stupid. You need to gather facts from all over and not just one source, and then kind of come to your own judgments and stuff. And like I say, I get my news from social media. I get it from Al Jazeera. I get it from BBC and stuff, and then I kind of form my own opinions as to what's real and what's true and what's not. So we have to instill in people this curiosity and this real understanding that it's our job to seek out truth and to try to to normalize relations between people and countries and things like that.
You're absolutely right, because multiple sources give you a uniform information, which you can decipher for yourself. Uh, One last question is that when we are trying to attract youth to right values and right, because values are universal, values are not driven by a community. So how do you see the value based entertainment coming up in future?
Yeah, interesting. And I'm doing something now. I've just gotten involved in the world of podcasting, and it's kind of a funny story. I mean, it is if a bunch of couples, married couples, would go out to dinner, and one woman says, "I have to go to the restroom." Typically all of them would get up and go to the restroom together, and the guys are sitting there at the table going, what are they doing, what are they talking about, and stuff. But it really is indicative of this camaraderie among women that I don't think men necessarily share. So I created this podcast thing called Stall Talk, which is really about, it's the metaphor for that camaraderie among women. So I have women of four different generations, and every week they do a show, and they'll examine either things that are topical in the news that week, or just things in general like relationships and things like that. But you get to hear the different viewpoints about women from different generations, and it's a fabulous dialogue. And I think now, again, with technology and the ability to do podcasts, there are very few barriers to entry there. You could, anybody could do it. And you can really create this dialogue which didn't exist before, because the dialogue used to be controlled by very few big media companies. The dialogue is no longer controlled by very few media companies. Now the ability for smaller and smaller voices to have a role in media and shaping opinions and stuff like that. So I'm really exploring that whole podcast world as a way to do things that maybe big media doesn't allow me to do.
True, I think podcasting has really picked up, and it's also creating a new set of people who are addicted to, or in a good way,
Yeah.
to podcasting than in the mainstream media. So how do you think that mainstream media is going to catch up? Do you think is going to ever catch up now with the people having their own voice?
I think they're trying to figure out how they catch up. Um, I think they're a little behind the curve. But you take like a show like we're doing this Stall Talk, and you look at one of the things we did. One of the episodes we recently did, we had a gal on who's the first Gen Z woman to run for Congress in the United States, who's gotten no media play whatsoever until we kind of did this interview with her. And there's this, we had a Gen Z person interview the Gen Z gal who ran for Congress. And, I got to say that after you listen to these two young folks talk about the world and health and society and environment and stuff like that. You know what? I walked away from that show going, you know what? Maybe there is hope for us, because these kids are a lot smarter than we're giving them credit for. And I think particularly in the podcast world, we now have opened up the door for lots of divergent voices to have a play, and big media can't really figure out how to deal with these smaller and smaller audiences, but more knowledgeable and passionate audiences and stuff, because they don't know how to monetize it, and they have so much legacy human resources and technology that they really need big numbers to make sense of their business. But yet in the podcast world, you don't need big numbers, you just need loyal followers.
That's right. That's right. So how do you see the future of USA? And we are having more conversation on the podcast than in person when we are meeting.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that transition. I think you've seen a few big companies. Sirius Radio now has their own podcast platform, Simplecast, I think it's called, and Tribune is now got a podcast platform. So, we're starting to see these players that were always a little bit on the fringe of big media, um, learning that they need to embrace this stuff, and they're making it easier, um, for folks to with again, the smaller and smaller voices to be able to reach audiences. Now, technically, it's easy to do these. The real trick is how do you market them and how do you get to the how do you let people know that want to know about this thing? How do you get to that core audience? That's stuff we still need to learn how to do. I mean, we're not there yet.
It's a changing thing because algorithms keep changing, and we see ups and downs keeps going on. I think the companies do that. So that also brings to the question of the platforms itself. Can the platforms be more free and more open to all? Then, because the platforms also have their own brain, the AI is giving them the brains now.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing. And again, we just started working with people like the Tribune platform and the Sirius Radio platform and stuff like that. And up until now, they're being very good with letting creators be creative and stuff. And they're just, helping us find ways to monetize. Because if we can't monetize these things, we're not going to stick with them very long. Because we just can't continue to absorb losses. So provide the things that as a creative person, podcaster, we can't afford to have 30 people selling sponsorship. But somebody who's got a platform could have 30 people and stuff and sell across the few dozen podcasts that they have versus whatever. So right now, I think it's pretty much in a good place, and I think the players that are involved in it, we all seem to be going in the same direction. Hopefully it stays that way.
Thank you, Yarineva, for coming on the show, and I would like to invite you more to have these frank discussions.
Sure. Anytime. I'm typically in the US a lot more than I'm in Asia these days. So whenever you need me, just give me a ring.
All right, sir. Thank you very much, and thank you, viewers, for watching this show. Do let me know your feedback, and if you have any questions, do comment over there. I'm going to forward it to him. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Take care. Thank you.